My dad didn't even look up from his desk when I asked for a raise. He just laughed softly, like I'd told a joke, and said, "Hazel, you're lucky to have this job." 5 years. 5 years of running his company without a single raise. 5 years of late nights, emergency calls, cleaning up messes that weren't mine, holding the business together while he took the credit and my brother took the praise. I stood there, holding a folder full of numbers I'd prepared, profits I'd helped grow, contracts I'd saved, teams I'd built. None of it mattered. Instead, he reminded me of everything he'd done for me. The opportunity, the family name, the privilege of working for him at all. That was the moment something inside me finally snapped, not in anger, not in tears, but in clarity. I nodded. I thanked him. I walked out, and I made a decision he never saw coming. I started working at my dad's company when I was 24, just a few months after graduating college. There was no official onboarding, no contract, no title printed on a business card. My dad, Richard, just waved me into his office one morning and said, "You'll help out wherever you're needed. It's good experience." At first, I believed him. Carter Solutions wasn't small. We had dozens of employees, long-term clients, and contracts that kept the lights on in more than one city. My dad loved calling it a family business, even though family mostly meant him. Everyone else, including me, was expected to fall in line. I started with admin work, scheduling, emails, fixing small mistakes before clients noticed them. When someone quit suddenly, I absorbed their workload, temporarily. When a manager went on leave, I filled in until things settled. Somehow, things never settled. Within the first year, people stopped going to my dad with problems. They came to me. If payroll glitched, I fixed it. If a client threatened to walk, I calmed them down. If two departments were at war, I mediated. My dad would walk through the office like a king inspecting his territory, nodding while employees thanked him for changes I had implemented weeks earlier. He never corrected them. He never mentioned my name. At home, it was worse. At family dinners, my mom would ask, "So Hazel, are you still helping your father at work?" Helping. Like, this was a hobby. My younger brother Evan, on the other hand, was figuring himself out. He bounced between ideas, jobs, and excuses, and somehow always landed back on his feet. Whenever his name came up, my dad's voice softened. "He's got potential," Richard would say. "He just needs time." I didn't get time. I got responsibility. By year 2, I was working 60-hour weeks. By year 3, I was the one managers checked with before making decisions. By year 4, clients requested me by name, specifically me, because they trusted that I'd actually fix things. Still, nothing changed on paper. No raise. No title. No acknowledgement. Whenever I brought it up, my dad brushed it aside with the same calm authority he used on employees. "Don't rush things, Hazel. Be patient. Family doesn't nickel and dime each other." What he really meant was, don't ask. And for a long time, I didn't. Because I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, he'd eventually see me not as his daughter helping out, but as a professional who deserved respect. I didn't realize then that the role he'd assigned me was never meant to grow. It was meant to keep me exactly where I was. By the time my 5th year started, I wasn't just helping out anymore. I was running the company in every way that mattered, just without the title, the authority, or the pay to match. My day usually started before sunrise. I'd wake up to emails from clients on the East Coast, problems that couldn't wait until business hours. I learned quickly that if I didn't respond, things escalated, contracts stalled, tempers flared. Money leaked out of cracks, no one else bothered to seal. So I responded. Always. I built systems that didn't exist before, real systems, clear workflows, accountability. I reorganized teams so people stopped tripping over each other's responsibilities. I negotiated with vendors my dad had been loyal to, for years, loyal in the way that quietly drains your budget while smiling to your face. When I brought in better terms, he nodded and said, "Good timing. Not good work, just timing." Revenue climbed steadily, costs stabilized. Employee complaints dropped because someone was finally listening. That someone was me. When a senior manager stormed into my office, furious about unrealistic deadlines, I stayed late to rework the entire project plan with him. When a client threatened legal action over missed deliverables, I drove across town after hours, sat across from their legal team, and took responsibility without throwing anyone under the bus. I learned how to speak calmly while my heart raced, how to smile while being blamed for things I'd inherited, how to carry pressure without showing cracks. At company events, my dad loved giving speeches. He'd talk about his vision, his leadership, his sacrifices. I'd stand in the background, holding a clipboard or answering quiet questions, listening as people applauded him for decisions I'd drafted and plans I'd executed. Sometimes an employee would glance at me with a look that said, "We know," but they never said it out loud. Neither did he. At home, I told myself it was temporary. This is how family businesses work, I thought. You prove yourself first. But 5 years is a long time to keep proving yourself to someone who's already decided what you're worth. I watched my peers move on. Friends from college bought homes, negotiated bonuses, complained about things like PTO policies and performance reviews. Meanwhile, I was still learning, still helping, still being told that money wasn't the point. What hurt most wasn't the workload. I could handle that. It was the way my effort was quietly erased. When something went right, it was because my dad was experienced. When something went wrong, it was because I was still learning. There was no winning that equation. The cracks really started to show when my brother Evan began showing up more often. At first, it was casual. He'd drop by the office in the middle of the day, coffee in hand, joking with employees who barely knew what he did or didn't do. My dad lit up whenever he walked in, like the air itself got warmer. "Just showing him around," Dad said once, clapping Evan on the shoulder, letting him see how things run. I almost laughed. Because I was how things ran. By then, people were calling me before they called my dad. Department heads waited for my approval. Clients asked for me directly. Even my dad's longtime assistant quietly deferred to me when he wasn't around. I thought that meant something. I thought it meant I was finally impossible to ignore. But instead of recognition, I got silence. Instead of a raise, I got reminders to be patient. Instead of respect, I got gratitude lectures. That was when I started to understand the unspoken rule of my role. As long as I carried the weight without complaint, I was useful. The moment I asked to be acknowledged, I became inconvenient. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more normal that imbalance became. By the time I finally decided to ask for a raise, it wasn't because I was greedy. It was because I was exhausted from pretending that this was normal and from being told that wanting fairness meant I didn't appreciate everything I'd been given. What I didn't know yet was that asking the question would expose exactly how replaceable my dad thought I was, and how quickly he was willing to prove it. I didn't ask for the meeting impulsively. I planned it for weeks. I told myself that if I approached it the right way, calm, professional, backed by facts, my dad would finally see me not as his daughter, but as a key executive who had earned her place. I even rehearsed the opening line in my car before walking into the office that morning. "Dad, I'd like to talk about my compensation. Simple, neutral, respectful." I brought a folder with me. Inside were 5 years of work reduced to clean charts and bullet points. Revenue growth, cost reductions, retention numbers, client expansions, market comparisons showing what someone in my role would earn at any other company our size. I waited until he finished his phone call. Richard Carter leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach, the picture of patience. "All right," he said. "What's on your mind?" I started slowly, carefully. I talked about how my responsibilities had grown, how the company had grown, how I hadn't had a raise since the day I started. "I'm not asking for anything unreasonable," I said. "I just want my pay to reflect the work I'm actually doing." For a moment, he was quiet. Then he smiled, not warmly, not proudly, amused. "Hazel," he said, shaking his head like I'd misunderstood something obvious. "You're lucky to have this job." The words landed heavier than I expected. I tried again. "I understand that I'm working for family, but I'm effectively managing operations. That role has a market value. And," he cut me off with a raised hand. "Let's not turn this into a transaction," he said. "Family doesn't nickel and dime each other." I felt my chest tighten. "This isn't nickel and diming. This is 5 years without a raise. And 5 years of opportunity," he shot back. "Do you know how many people would kill to work alongside their father?" To learn directly from someone who built a company from nothing? I swallowed. I do work alongside you. No, he said firmly. You work for me. That was the first crack. I opened the folder, sliding it toward him. These numbers, he didn't look at them. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice lowering into something more personal, more dangerous. Let me remind you of something, he said. When you started here, you didn't have experience. I took a chance on you. I gave you a seat at the table. I gave you stability. I stared at him. I earned that seat. He laughed. Not loud, just enough to sting. You earned experience, he said, not entitlement. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I'm not entitled, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'm asking to be paid fairly for the role I've been filling. And I'm telling you, he replied, that money isn't the point. If you're here just for a paycheck, maybe you're missing what this job is really about. There it was. The guilt. The moral high ground. I could feel years of swallowed frustration pressing against my ribs. So what happens if I don't agree? I asked quietly. His expression shifted, not angry but sharp. Then maybe you need to think about whether you belong here, he said, because I won't be pressured in my own company. I looked at him, then really looked. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't even a discussion. It was a test. Stay quiet and grateful, or risk everything. I closed the folder slowly. I need some time to think, I said. He nodded, already reaching for his phone. Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, jobs like this don't grow on trees. I stood up on legs that felt strangely light. As I walked out of his office, I heard him add almost casually, and, Hazel, don't forget who made all this possible. I didn't respond. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and stared at my screen without seeing it. For years, I'd told myself that if I just worked harder, stayed loyal, proved myself enough, this moment would end differently. But now I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about money. It was about control. And the raise was never the real question. The real question was whether I would keep accepting a role that required me to shrink myself just to keep the peace. I didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time, I knew one thing for certain. If I stayed, nothing would ever change. 2 weeks after that conversation, my dad called for an all-staff meeting. That alone was strange. We didn't do all-hands meetings unless something big was happening. New contracts, restructuring, layoffs. People whispered as they gathered in the conference room, speculating in low voices. I stood near the back, notebook in hand out of habit, already running through contingency plans in my head. My dad walked in 10 minutes late, smiling like a man about to deliver good news. And then Evan walked in behind him. My stomach dropped. Evan looked relaxed, confident, wearing a suit that still had its creases from the store. He gave me a quick nod, like we were coworkers who barely knew each other, not siblings who'd grown up under the same roof with wildly different expectations. My dad cleared his throat. I want to thank everyone for coming on short notice, he began. As you all know, the company has grown significantly over the past few years. I almost laughed at the irony. With that growth, he continued, comes the need for fresh leadership and new ideas. That's why I'm excited to announce that Evan will be joining us as our new Director of Strategic Development. There it was. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then louder, driven more by confusion than enthusiasm. Evan smiled broadly, waving like he was being welcomed onto a stage. I didn't clap. I couldn't. My dad went on about Evan's vision, his natural people skills, his ability to see opportunities others miss. Each word felt like it was scraping against something raw inside my chest. When the meeting ended, people avoided my eyes. A few gave me sympathetic looks. One manager mouthed, "I'm sorry." I found my dad in his office minutes later, my hands shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "What is this?" I asked. "Strategic development? Since when does Evan have experience in that?" My dad didn't look surprised. "He's got potential." "Potential isn't a qualification," I said, "and you didn't even talk to me about this." He leaned back, folding his arms. I didn't need to. I hesitated, then asked the question I already knew the answer to. "What's his salary?" He sighed, like I was being difficult. "That's not really your concern." "I run operations," I said evenly. It absolutely is. There was a pause. Then, reluctantly, he said the number. It was more than double what I made. I felt something inside me go very still. You told me there wasn't room in the budget, I said. That was different, he replied quickly. Evan's role is forward-facing. It's an investment. And what am I? I asked. He frowned. You're reliable, Hazel. You keep things running. Reliable. Not strategic. Not visionary. Just dependable. I left his office without another word. Back at my desk, my inbox was already filling up questions from department heads, asking how Evan's role would affect reporting lines, approvals, processes. The same people who trusted me to keep things from falling apart now wanted guidance on how to work around a decision I'd had no say in. I answered them anyway, because that's what I'd always done. But something had shifted. For the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. My dad didn't refuse to give me a raise because he couldn't afford it. He refused because giving it to me would mean admitting I mattered as much as he did, or worse, that I mattered more than his son. Evan's promotion wasn't about business growth. It was about reminding me of my place. And as I watched my brother settle into an office down the hall, an office I'd helped set up years earlier, I realized that the decision I'd been circling for weeks was no longer optional. Staying silent was no longer loyalty. It was consent. That night, dinner felt like a performance. My mom had cooked my favorite meal, like she always did when tension hung thick in the air, as if food could smooth over what words couldn't fix. My dad talked loudly about work, about growth and momentum, carefully avoiding my eyes. Evan sat across from me, relaxed, scrolling through his phone, already acting like the company belonged to him. No one mentioned the meeting. Finally, I did. So, I said, setting my fork down. Director of Strategic Development, congratulations. Evan looked up, surprised, then shrugged. Thanks. Dad thinks I can help bring in new opportunities. I waited for my dad to say something, anything to acknowledge how this might look. He didn't. You could have talked to me first, I said quietly. My dad sighed, clearly irritated. This again? Yes, I said. This again. Because you hired him into a senior role at more than double my pay without a single conversation with me. My mom's smile faded. Hazel, maybe this isn't the right time. When is? I asked. When I burn out? When the company collapses because no one wants to admit who's actually holding it together? My dad's face hardened. Watch your tone. I'm not being disrespectful, I said. I'm being honest. Evan shifted uncomfortably. I didn't ask for this to turn into a big thing, he said. No hard feelings, right? I stared at him. You walked into a job I've been doing pieces of for years, with none of the accountability. How am I supposed to feel about that? He shrugged again. That's between you and Dad. And that was the problem. It was always between me and Dad. Evan never had to fight. He never had to justify himself. He just existed, and doors opened. My dad stood up, towering over the table. I'm done with this conversation. You should be grateful you have a place in this family and in this company. Plenty of parents wouldn't offer their kids half of what I've given you. There it was again. Grateful. Given. As if every hour I'd worked hadn't been earned. Asking to be treated fairly isn't ingratitude, I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. It's basic respect. He pointed toward the hallway. If you're unhappy, no one is forcing you to stay. The room went silent. My mom looked at me, eyes glossy. Hazel, please, don't make this worse. I stood up slowly. I'm not the one making this worse. I'm just the one saying it out loud. I left before anyone could stop me. In my childhood bedroom, surrounded by trophies and textbooks that suddenly felt like evidence of a different life, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. My phone buzzed with a message from Evan. Hey. No hard feelings, okay? Dad just wants what's best for everyone. I didn't reply. For the first time, it hit me that my family saw my loyalty as a guarantee, not a gift. That they believed I would always bend, always adjust, always swallow my discomfort to keep the peace. And maybe that had been true, but something had changed. The company tension had followed me home, crossed a line it had no right to cross, and wrapped itself around the word family until I could barely recognize it. That night, lying awake in the dark, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not beg for respect in a place that only valued my silence. If I was going to lose something, it wouldn't be my self-worth. It would be the illusion that loyalty alone could ever make me equal. I didn't quit the next day. That would have been too easy. Too loud. And, in a strange way, it would have proven my dad right that I was emotional, impulsive, not ready for real leadership. Instead, I went quiet. I showed up to work on Monday like nothing had changed. I ran meetings, solved problems, smoothed tensions between departments now awkwardly unsure who they were supposed to report to. Evan floated in and out of conversations, tossing around buzzwords and vague ideas, and people kept looking to me for clarification. I gave it to them, not because I was loyal anymore, but because I was observant. Every email I sent, I saved. Every responsibility I handled that wasn't in my job description, I documented. Every time someone deferred to me instead of my dad or Evan, I made a note. At night, after everyone else had gone home, I stayed late not to work but to review contracts, payroll records, internal policies. I noticed things I'd never had the emotional distance to see before. I wasn't just underpaid, I was misclassified. My role met every legal standard for senior management, yet on paper I was still listed as an administrative employee. No overtime, no executive protections, no compensation adjustments that matched my authority. The realization made my stomach twist. One evening, I met Lena from HR for coffee. She'd worked at the company almost as long as I had and knew how things really functioned. Off the record, she said carefully, stirring her cup, if you ever decided to leave, we'd be in trouble. I nodded. I know, she hesitated. That's not a compliment. A week later, I sat across from Daniel Ross, a labor attorney recommended by a former client. His office was quiet, neutral, nothing like the charged spaces I'd grown used to. He didn't interrupt as I laid everything out. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. Hazel, he said, this isn't just unfair, it's unlawful. The word hung in the air. Unlawful, not unfortunate, not complicated, not family business drama. Unlawful. He explained my options calmly. Documentation, formal notice, audit triggers, what retaliation would look like, what protection looked like. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Grounded. I didn't tell my dad. I didn't warn Evan. I didn't threaten anyone. I kept doing my job. But inside, I'd already made the decision. I wasn't going to ask again. I wasn't going to argue. And I definitely wasn't going to beg. The next move wouldn't come from emotion. It would come from clarity. And when it came, it would change the balance of power in a way my dad had never imagined because for the first time, I wasn't relying on his approval. I was relying on the law. The email went out on a Thursday morning. Mandatory executive session. Board members only. Legal counsel present. My dad stormed into my office 10 minutes later, his face flushed, jaw tight. Do you know anything about this? He demanded. I met his eyes and nodded. Yes, that was all I said. The conference room felt different that afternoon, heavier, quieter. The long glass table reflected faces that had never looked nervous before. Board members shuffled papers. A lawyer I didn't recognize adjusted his glasses. Evan sat 2 seats away from me, scrolling on his phone like this was another meeting he could tune out. My dad took the head of the table. Of course he did. The attorney cleared his throat. This session concerns internal role classifications, compensation practices, and fiduciary compliance. Dad scoffed. This is a waste of time. The lawyer didn't react. He clicked a remote, and a slide appeared on the screen. My job description. My actual responsibilities. Side by side. Emails followed. Meeting minutes. Approval chains with my name highlighted again and again. Salary comparisons. Legal definitions. The room went silent. One board member leaned forward. So Hazel has been performing executive-level duties for years, without executive compensation? Yes, the lawyer said calmly. And without proper classification. My dad laughed sharply. She's family. It doesn't matter, the lawyer interrupted. Employment law doesn't recognize family exceptions. Evan finally looked up. Wait, what does this have to do with me? The next slide answered that. His title. His salary. His lack of qualifications. One of the board members turned to him. Can you explain your role? Evan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I'm working on growth initiatives. Which initiatives? She pressed. Silence. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My dad stood up. This is an ambush. No, I said quietly. Every head turned toward me. It's documentation. He stared at me like I was a stranger. You did this behind my back. I tried to do it with your respect, I replied. You left me no other option. The lawyer folded his hands. Given the evidence, the company faces significant liability if this isn't addressed immediately. Another board member exhaled. We need corrective action. Now. My dad looked around the table, searching for support that wasn't there. For the first time, his authority didn't fill the room. What do you want? He asked me, his voice low. I met his gaze steadily. I want what I earned. And I want clear boundaries on paper. No yelling. No threats. Just truth. The room agreed. By the time the meeting ended, decisions had been made, titles corrected, compensation adjusted retroactively, oversight imposed, Evan's role, under review. My dad didn't speak to me as we left. Neither did Evan. But as I walked out of that room, I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Not victory. Relief. Because, for the first time, the truth had spoken louder than loyalty and everyone had heard it. The changes were immediate and strangely hollow. On paper, everything I had asked for finally existed. My title was corrected. My compensation was adjusted. Committees were formed, safeguards installed, lawyers copied on emails that used to land quietly in my inbox. People congratulated me in hushed tones, like I'd survived something contagious. My dad avoided me. When we did cross paths, he spoke through clenched politeness as if every word cost him pride. Evan stopped showing up altogether. His strategic role dissolved quietly, without announcements or applause. One day his office was simply empty, the nameplate gone. And yet, despite all of it, the building no longer felt like mine. The trust was gone. I realized then that winning the argument hadn't repaired the relationship, it had only revealed what was already broken. The company could change policies. It couldn't undo years of being unseen. So I made one last decision. I submitted my resignation the following Monday. No drama, no speeches. Just a letter thanking the board for the opportunity and stating my final day. I had already accepted an offer elsewhere, one that came with respect, clear boundaries, and a role that didn't require me to shrink myself to belong. My dad read the letter in silence. You're really leaving, he said finally. Yes, I replied. I need to. He nodded once. I hope you know what you're doing. I met his eyes. I do. On my last day, I packed my things slowly. Emails came in from colleagues wishing me luck, thanking me for leadership they'd never been allowed to name. Lena hugged me in the hallway. Someone left a note on my desk that simply read, "You mattered." As I walked out of the building, the weight I'd been carrying for 5 years finally lifted. I didn't leave angry. I didn't leave bitter. I left whole. Because sometimes the happiest ending isn't staying and being proven right. It's walking away knowing you never needed permission to be treated with dignity, and that choosing yourself was never the betrayal they made it out to be.